welcome to Core Volunteer Training. Tonight we are going to have the chance to celebrate our work these last 3 months as a cohort through our own stories. And who's going to guide us through that is none other than this gentleman, that crazy cowboy from Waco, Marshall Saunders. Was trained by Vice President Al Gore to give his slideshow on climate change way back over 10 years ago. And in the first 10 months after being trained, he gave the talk 43 times to almost 3,000 people. Marshall realized the solutions he was offering weren't a match for the scale of the problem, as you've probably heard if you've heard Marshall's story before. So in October of 2007, he founded Citizens Climate Lobby and Citizens Climate Education, which we all know continues to teach and support citizens to lobby their members of Congress, the media, and fellow citizens in order to create the political will for a stable climate. A couple of things really quick you might not know about Marshall. Not only has he spoken over 300 times at different service clubs in dozens of countries and 5 Rotary International conventions, he's also the founder and former chairman of the board of the Grameen de la Frontera, which is a microcredit lender in Sonora, Mexico, and has made more than 10,000 loans to poor women throughout rural Mexico. Additionally, Marshall has also served on the boards of directors of other microcredit organizations. I'm not going to embarrass him too much more, but we do want to make sure to acknowledge our gratitude for being on the call tonight, Marshall. And I'll turn it over to you in just a little bit.
Okay, fine.
And so just a quick reminder of the agenda. We're going to talk about the power of stories. So tonight is all about kind of storytelling as well. We're going to talk about some tools and techniques that have been field tested for inspiring change. We're going to try those out and listen to Marshall's story. And then we'll have a chance for a more robust Q&A. And then we'll pivot to sharing your stories. So again, tonight's prompt for Core Volunteer Training was thinking about how have you been changed or shaped in your participation with CCL? What story do you have to share? And we definitely want to get to those as well, and then we'll look ahead from there. So let's jump in. I'm just going to give a quick overview. Who here doesn't love stories? I'd imagine that that probably wouldn't be any of us on the line. You're all giving of your time tonight to learn a couple more. And the beautiful thing that I kind of want to ground our discussion with at first is that these stories that are all a part of our popular culture and lexicon, from Star Wars to Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, to The Wizard of Oz, to The Lion King and any of the other Disney or Brothers Grimm renditions, from The Matrix all the way back to Homer, they all have a pretty similar element. And one of the things that I think is the art of storytelling is being aware of what is called the hero's journey. Now, I know many of you on the line might already have heard of Joseph Campbell and his work as a mythologist, but if you haven't yet, here's just a quick, helpful visual. And again, all of these notes in tonight's slide deck, you're welcome to look at. Essentially, Joseph Campbell became famous as a researcher and a mythologist for writing this book, A Hero with a Thousand Faces. And throughout that research, what he discovered was that there's a lot of common themes and patterns running through our favorite stories throughout all of our lives and all the way back many generations ago. And you can see this arc traced out in this graph here. And after years of research, Campbell's kind of helped us distill it down into only a couple of key points, so you don't have to spend years eking out kind of the common themes of each of these stories as well. But he calls this structure the Mano Myth. And George Lucas, who was mentored by Campbell, he was inspired by the hero's journey for his groundbreaking themes, and basically credits the popular saga because of its following this timeless story structure. And so the only thing I'm going to point out here, we can get into each of these stages along the journey later. If you want to have a different call, I'd be happy to nerd out with you. But for the sake of tonight, you can see a couple of common themes that all of us can learn in our own storytelling through Joseph Campbell's work. And that is often that we start being called to adventure. A lot of us can identify with this. The hero is an unlikely hero. They don't feel as if they're even called for the purpose that they're being summoned for. They go through some kind of conflict. There is this transition from their original world to the new world they find themselves in. There's this transformation. They meet helpers along the way and mentors, and ultimately deliver or return to the place that they began transformed. And I think that's really the key message in each of our story formations to kind of walk away from the hero's journey tonight. And again, we can get back to that later. But another way that you can kind of even distill this down even simpler, a three-step approach that you can use in forming your own stories is this. Every effective story should have a before, an after, and a how. So how did the change happen between that before and after? And all of this is tied into really CCL's second purpose. So everyone on the line knows that we exist to create the political will for a livable world, but oftentimes that secondary purpose of empowering each of us as individuals to experience breakthroughs in exercising our own personal and political power, that's kind of glossed over. And so tonight's emphasis in storytelling is really to help you realize that you are already on your own journey and you are already experiencing somewhat, if not a great amount of breakthroughs. And let's find ways to crystallize those and convey those to others in your own life to help captivate the magic that you're feeling in your advocacy for this climate solution. So here's a couple of quick tips and then I'll turn it over to Marshall. So I love this quote. There's two ways to share knowledge. You can either push it out or pull them in with a story. And I think that really frames this essential question, why bother? What's so good about storytelling anyways? You know, we know that stories are captivating, they're persuasive. Research has shown that really being able to be swept up in a story allows us to entertain new ideas. Here's a really powerful quote that I think demonstrates that well. Effective storytelling can change our opinions, inspire us to achieve goals that we didn't think were possible, and demonstrate how we can change things for the better. All pretty important tools to be able to enable, all with the ability to tell a story. I also love this quote from Michael Margolis. The stories we tell literally make the world. We're already all telling stories. And if you want to change the world, you need to change your story. This truth applies both to individuals and to institutions. And tonight we're going to focus on the individual. So just a quick reminder, you know, as you build your stories out, and again, we all have stories, it's really key to think about your goal. What is your goal as the storyteller, ultimately, to help change the way your audience reacts? There's essentially three different aims that you can target. You can target changing the way that they think, the way that they feel, or the way they act. And it doesn't have to be even one of those. It can be a variety or a combination of those. But another way of kind of distilling down your goal as the storyteller.
And a lot of this social science research that we're highlighting, a special thanks goes to climate reality leaders Jessica Hamilton and Carl Duvendorten, who put together a wonderful presentation on this storytelling as well.
Another common thing that I think often is helpful to emphasize, CCL prides ourselves in being nonpartisan and building on common ground. And stories literally have been shown to synchronize our brains with each other. As community members, we're bound by common values, and stories essentially have been shown to tap into 6 basic emotions: happiness, anger, sadness, disgust, fear, and surprise. And so if you can convey a story that captures your audience's emotions on those levels and demonstrates the values that you share with them, you will automatically be able to access that change behavior, that change language that you're looking to empower them to tap into. So 2 quick final slides on some tips on how to improve or focus on enhancing all of our storytelling ability. The first one really is kind of a launch to these tips for improving, and that is this famous quote by Barbara Greene, which really is demonstrating the power of showing, not telling. Because unfortunately, as we all know, facts often don't speak for themselves. Instead, we need to use images, metaphors, 5 senses, visualizations, all of these things to illustrate what the important parts of our story is if we're painting a picture with our words. And so I think the real key in improving your own storytelling begins with remembering what's your own goal, showing, not just telling, one thing that Marshall will model very well here in his story in just a little bit is being accessible, being open and showing your own struggles. That kind of vulnerability is key to identify with others as they go through their own journey. And it's really important, harkening back to that hero's journey discussion, to have conflict. There doesn't need to be fisticuffs. Nobody needs to get hurt, but there needs to be an essential conflict in your story from the before to the after. What changed? What tension is there? What's kind of going on in a way that others can relate to see that there has been struggle along the way. And the other key is not to give away all the details and allow your audience to kind of paint a little bit more of the picture. And Marshall's also very good at this one. You want to convey emotion and really emphasize that you too are relatable. It's wonderful to be aware of your audience's expressions and kind of even anticipate them and model your own facial expression matching theirs, using gestures. You don't have to be grandiose, but even in a small scale conversation, the use of hands or other body language really is absolutely critical. There's a tip of always kind of, as you're preparing to try your story out, getting, kind of a recording even, so you can evaluate your own self. What worked well? Where did you have an awkward pause? What can you improve on? And then lastly, the best test of whether or not your story was effective was measuring or not your audience engagement. Were they actually engaged or not? And so the last thing I'll just share is another helpful frame of evaluation, actually, from the Center for Story-Based Strategy, a nonprofit out of California that does story building for individuals and nonprofits. And they break this down into a 6 kind of step or topic acronym. And it's easy to remember, frames. So you can always kind of, check to see if you're actually effective in your own messaging and creation of story building by using the frames framework, for lack of a better word. So frame the issue. Does your story reinforce the values that you're seeking to promote? Will it be broadly impactful and involve solutions? Reframe the current story. Is your messaging already just kind of using the same framework that is dominant, or does it kind of help reframe and help people think about things in a new way? Accessible to the audience. So who is your audience, and what message are you trying to persuade them to think about? Again, going back to that aims. How are you looking to impact their thoughts, their behaviors, their feelings? Is it memorable? Do you have, kind of some catchy, sticky hook in it? How can you encapsulate your message in a symbol or a metaphor? Emotional. Do you include some appeal to the emotions? An effective message should really speak to people in terms of values and deliver some emotional impact. Trigger emotional responses as well with those common emotions that I talked about earlier: anger, fear, happiness, disgust. And then lastly, is it simple and short? I tried to distill all this down into about 10 minutes. It probably still was a bit too long for everyone's attention, but the most effective story is one that is done before the audience gets bored with it. And so make sure that you can distill it down into the kernel of wisdom that you're looking before you lose their attention. So all of that being said, I encourage you, especially if you have been following along, to listen for how Marshall uses these approaches in his own story, and start thinking about even if you want to use them in your own for tonight as we share. But without further ado, what I'm going to do, I'll remind everyone again, we'll all share our stories a little bit, but let's start by listening to Marshall's story about his very first meeting with a member of Congress. Marshall, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Okay, Brett. Well, first of all, I think all that was very interesting, and I need to think about it a little bit. Well, this is what happened to me in 1994. It was long before I founded Citizens Climate Lobby. And it was a meeting when the results partners in San Diego went to meet with our member of Congress. And I'm going to tell it just like it happened and not exaggerate at all. And as I say, we had gone to see our member of Congress. His name was Brian Bilbray, and he's Republican, a good Republican. And the group was there to ask him for a few things, funding for tuberculosis, malaria, and AIDS funding, and measles, and that sort of thing for the global poor. And I was to ask him about funding or co-sponsoring a bill, the microcredit bill. The microcredit bill is the tiny self-employment business loans to very poor women. So I had some experience in that. So there were about 6 or 7 of us, and we went to the office of Mr. Bilbray, and we were ushered into a meeting room. And the meeting room had these great big faux leather chairs, mahogany colored, and yeah, they were just very luxurious and kind of formal for me. And Mr. Bilbray came in right away, and he sat down straight across from me. And and I had this thought, well, I wish there were a table in between, kind of protect me or something. And he was wearing a dark blue suit, a conservative, I call it a Republican tie, I don't know, just a conservative tie. And I looked down at his shoes, and they were black and so shiny I could see the overhead lights reflected in his shoes. And right away I was, nervous. And so the idea was that each one of the results partners was going to speak, and we were kind of in a circle, and it started on my left and came around the circle. So I had plenty of time before I was to speak. And as I say, they were each one asking for something to do with AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. And I thought it's like the only thing I could think of was my legs. Where should they be? And they were at that moment there. I found them crossed at the ankles, and I thought, well, that's kind of goofy looking a bit. And so I crossed my legs at the knees. The congressman is straight across from me, and I wondered, is he looking at me, thinking I'm fidgeting around or something? So I crossed my legs at the knees, and I thought, well, no, that's not right either. That's a little too laid back. So I put both my feet flat on the floor, and I thought, yeah, that's right. I'll just leave them right there. Then there was this problem with my arms. What am I going to do with my arms? I didn't know. And I found my hands folded in my lap, and I thought, well, that doesn't look kind of like a lobby meeting. It looks like a prayer meeting. So I put my hands on the arms of the chair, and I thought, yeah, that's right, just right there. So the meeting's going on, by the way, and it's kind of coming around my way, and I realized then that there's just enough time. I think there's just enough time for me to run the story through, what I want to say through my head one more time. And that's when I realized that I couldn't remember what I was going to talk about. I just really had no idea. I was completely blank. And I thought for a minute, and then finally I had a little prayer. I said, Lord, just give me the first 2 words, and then I'll take it from there. And no answer. The Lord was not there to help me that day. I said, well, Lord, just give me the subject. You just tell me what the subject is. I'll take it from there. Well, again, no answer. And so now the lady on my right had finished up, and it was my turn to talk. And everybody looked at me, and I didn't say anything. and the group leader said, Marshall is going to talk about microcredit bill, the microcredit bill in the House. And I said, oh yeah, the microcredit bill. And so I began talking. You know, I had practiced it, and the group met before the meeting with the congressman across the parking lot in the Denny's restaurant, and I did fine there. And so yeah, I was really really embarrassed when I couldn't figure out what to say, but that's kind of how it was for me. So Bill Bray and I became friends, not close friends, but I asked him the very next year to, well, first of all, he co-sponsored that microcredit bill, and it passed, and we got $250 million, I think it was. And then that bill went up every year, and I think it got up to 700 million. And he was always on the bill. And the group leader asked me the next year if I would call him and talk to him and ask him about funding for AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria the next year, which I did, and he sponsored it. And then I asked him if he would talk at our group fundraiser, which he did. So that was my baptism by fire, not knowing what I was going to say until the very, it was my turn to talk. And it was my team, it was my team that brought me through. And oh yeah, and I like to say this: lobbying is a team sport. Don't try it by yourself. It's a team sport. So there you go. That's what happened to me.
I love it, Marshall. Thank you for the distilled wisdom. And I think the thing that we all probably love the most is just that it's so relatable that even this person that probably feels at times far away, or, how did he get his act together to form CCL, had such a reaction in your own first meeting. I think we all can really identify with that. Yeah. Anyone that's on the line that has a question for Marshall about that story, or an observation, or just anything in general, especially with all of the work that you've been putting in with Core Volunteer Training, have a chance to check in.
Marshall, your story obviously had a very personal component to it, which I found was very relatable. And I've been very impressed with CCL in their sort of scope, in terms of it's not just the technicalities of the economics or of climate science, but also there's this piece relative to our sort of psyches, if you will. And I was wondering, how did you come to develop the thought that was important, and how did that evolve? I guess I'm really quite curious, because that's something that usually organizations don't necessarily always pay a lot of attention to.
Julia, that is a great question. And it makes me very happy that part of the puzzle is coming through. Mm-hmm. Of course, I've never thought I could talk directly about it. It's a personal transformation, mm-hmm. and I have been on a personal journey. When I was about 41, 42, I was pretty much a selfish, taking care of my family and trying to be a decent citizen, but it didn't go any further than that. And I read a book, that maybe the most influential one was A Road Less Traveled. Did you read that, Julia? And then the author wrote a second book called The Different Drum. and he had the 4 stages of spiritual growth. And I clearly recognized that I was in the, I never thought about that, but I realized that I was in the 3rd stage, what he called the 3rd stage of spiritual growth. And it was the person is trying to do the right thing, but not for some religious reason. But the 4th stage was mystic, and I thought, what's that? I never heard of that before. And so I began to read about that. I came across, I started reading Gandhi. You know, I'm not sure he was a mystic, but he was, you know, certainly close. And you know, right from the beginning, I was putting precepts of Gandhi into the training, truth and nonviolence. Mm-hmm. So let me stop there. But I'm glad, very glad, that component is coming through to people.
What I would really love to do is pivot to these 2 prompts that people were kind of encouraged to reflect on heading in. So what moment are you most proud of as a CCL volunteer? And or what experiences have helped expand your comfort zone and led you on your own journey to unknown places? And so what I'd love to do is just kind of open it up. And again, this is, you know, this is a safe zone, if you will, and there, no judgment. But the only way we get better is with practice, right? And what an opportunity tonight to workshop kind of your own story and have a chance to kind of try it out, take it for a test run. Marshall and I and the rest of us would love to listen and hear all of your stories tonight.
Hey, this is Alex from New Jersey.
Go for it, Alex.
Alex, great.
I'd like to start with CCL has kind of very much given me a voice in both a political aspect and in a personal reason. And when I started my first meeting that I went to for CCL, it was something I really cared about, obviously the climate. And I think I spoke to maybe one person the whole time for the meeting and just kind of listened and soaked it all in. And then as I got more involved in the core volunteer training and I started to stay for the breakout rooms and for stepping into that communication I've never really done before and like talking to a lot of strangers and like being really uncomfortable with it, but kind of just working through it, kind of started giving me and made me realize that like our Congress people and the people who represent us aren't these far off people, and that they're very much, you can access them if you choose to, and if you progress and you want to talk to them. Overall, I've given a presentation already. I also had a meeting with our district leader yesterday, and so I had a very similar experience of like, oh geez, it's my turn to talk, and I kind of choked a little bit, but my team was able to like cue me into it, which was really good. And so I definitely stepping out of my comfort zone, and it's brought me a lot of clarity and able to communicate on a level I've never been able to before. So that's awesome. Just what CCL's done for me and what I'm going to continue to promote. So that's my story.
Oh, Alex.
Yay.
Spoken from the heart. Wow. Thank you for sharing your story. What I'd love to do is continuing to hear your story. We will send out a survey about core volunteer training and your feedback on what you've enjoyed, what you think can continue to be improved on, and feel free to share your story with that. You have my email here again as well. Feel free to reach out at any point if there's questions or comments that you'd like to kind of really field about kind of your next steps in CCL. After core volunteer training, it's pretty straightforward. We just encourage people to get active locally. You've already got all the tools you need now, and your chapter is waiting for you to really kind of take up that banner and help lead them to unknown places and develop your own hero's journey with it, if you will. And I'll just close with this quote that I think really embodies all of our feelings about the power of stories and about the ability for all of us to bring life to the stories that we have to tell. It's from a famous poet, Hayao Miyazaki, and he writes, "I do believe in the power of story. I believe that stories have an important role to play in the formation of human beings that can stimulate, amaze, and inspire their listeners." And so we hope that you have been inspired and amazed and stimulated tonight. And with that, we thank you for being on the call, and we look forward to being with you along in the journey ahead, and hopefully see